In the bustling suburb of Ogudu, Lagos, Linda Adebayo swept the small compound of their modest duplex as the morning sun painted the sky orange. Her husband Raymond had already left for his job at the construction company, but not before kissing her forehead and promising they would make it through another month. 15 years of marriage had taught them both the meaning of resilience. They had started with nothing, sleeping on a mattress on the floor of a single room in Mushin, sharing meals of bread and tea when money was tight. Now, Raymond's promotion to site supervisor and Linda's small catering business had blessed them with this two-bedroom home. "Good morning, my sister." Sandra's voice called from the gate. Linda's face lit up as her best friend from Lagos State University approached with her usual bright smile. Sandra Okafor had been Linda's roommate during their undergraduate days. While Linda studied business administration, Sandra pursued mass communication but never quite found her footing after graduation. She had remained unmarried, moving from one relationship to another, always claiming she was waiting for the right one. "Sandra, you're early today," Linda laughed, embracing her friend. "Come, let me serve you breakfast." As they sat together sharing plantain and eggs, Linda couldn't help but notice how Sandra's eyes lingered on the family photos scattered around their modest living room. There was something in that gaze, a hunger that Linda would later wish she had recognized as dangerous. "Welcome back, fam. And if you're new here, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button. More powerful stories are on the way." The aroma of jollof rice filled the Adebayo household as Linda prepared for their monthly fellowship dinner. Pastor Williams and his wife would be joining them, along with Sandra, who had become almost like family over the years. Raymond arrived home carrying a bag of soft drinks, his construction uniform dusty but his smile warm. "Where is our sister Sandra?" he asked, using the affectionate term he had adopted for Linda's best friend. "She's coming," Linda replied, stirring the pot. "You know how she likes to make an entrance." When Sandra arrived, she wore a figure-hugging dress that seemed inappropriate for a fellowship gathering, but Linda said nothing. She had learned to overlook her friend's need for attention. During dinner, the conversation turned to children. Pastor Williams spoke about the blessing of offspring, and Linda's hand instinctively went to her flat stomach. She and Raymond had been trying to conceive for 3 years now, visiting doctors and praying fervently. "God's time is the best," Linda confided to Sandra later as they cleaned dishes. "Sometimes I wonder if there's something wrong with me." Sandra's response was gentle but calculated. "My dear, don't worry yourself. These things happen when they're meant to. Besides," she paused, drying a plate slowly, "maybe you should be grateful for the freedom you have now." Linda missed the subtle poison in those words, focusing instead on Raymond's voice from the living room as he discussed football with Pastor Williams. She had no idea that Sandra was already beginning to plant seeds of doubt about the very foundation of their marriage. Mama Linda woke up in her small flat in Ikeja with her heart pounding against her chest. The dream had been so vivid, so disturbing, that she could still smell the smoke and hear the crying. In the dream, she had seen her daughter Linda standing in a burning house, calling for help, while a woman who looked exactly like Sandra stood outside with a bucket of water, refusing to help. The woman had Linda's baby in her arms, claiming it as her own. By 6 in the morning, Mama Linda was already on a bus to Ogudu. Her daughter needed to hear this warning. "Mama, dreams are just dreams," Linda protested as her mother paced the small living room. "Sandra has been my friend for over 15 years. She was in my wedding, she helped us move into this house." But Mama Linda was insistent. "My daughter, I have lived 62 years on this earth. When God speaks through dreams, a wise woman listens. That girl," she pointed toward the door as if Sandra was standing there, "she has a spirit of jealousy around her." Raymond, who had been quietly listening while getting ready for work, finally spoke. "Mama, with respect, Sandra calls me brother. She has never shown any inappropriate behavior." The older woman fixed him with a stern look. "My son, the snake that bites you is often the one you fed with your own hand." As Raymond left for work and Mama Linda prepared to return to Ikeja, Linda found herself troubled. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, but her loyalty to Sandra remained strong. She had no way of knowing that at that very moment, Sandra was planning to test the boundaries of the trust that had been placed in her. The argument started over something trivial. Raymond had forgotten to stop by the market to buy tomatoes for Linda's catering order. But stress from unpaid bills and the pressure of trying to conceive had made both of them more sensitive than usual. "You promised me, Raymond." Linda's voice carried through the thin walls of their duplex. "Mrs. Okoro specifically requested my jollof rice for her daughter's naming ceremony tomorrow." "I said I'm sorry," Raymond shot back. "The site supervisor kept us late, and traffic from Lekki was terrible." Their neighbors could hear every word, and Linda felt embarrassed. This was the kind of public display she had always worked to avoid. Sandra, who had come to visit, watched the entire exchange with careful attention. When Raymond stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him, she made her move. "Linda, sit down," she said gently, guiding her friend to the sofa. "You know men get overwhelmed when they feel like they're failing. Raymond works so hard for you. But I work hard too." Linda protested through her tears. "Of course you do," Sandra soothed, but her next words were carefully chosen. "Maybe you should give him some space tonight. Let him cool off." When Raymond returned 3 hours later, expecting to apologize, he found only Sandra in the living room. "Where is Linda?" he asked. "She went to stay with her friend Bucky tonight," Sandra lied smoothly. "She said she needed time to think." For the first time in their marriage, Raymond found himself alone with Sandra after dark. She had positioned herself carefully, wearing a low-cut blouse and speaking in soft, sympathetic tones about how difficult marriage could be. The temptation was planted that night, though Raymond resisted. But Sandra had successfully created the first crack in a marriage that had weathered 15 years of storms. 3 weeks after the tomato incident, another fight erupted. This time it was over money. Linda had discovered that Raymond had lent 5,000 naira to his younger brother without consulting her, money they had earmarked for her medical tests at the fertility clinic. "We agreed on this, Raymond." Linda's voice was sharp with frustration. "Dr. Adeyemi said the tests were important." "My brother was desperate," Raymond defended. "His wife just gave birth, and they had no money for the hospital bill. And what about us? What about our own child that we're trying to have?" The words hung in the air like a curse. Raymond's face darkened. "Maybe there won't be a child, Linda. Maybe we need to accept that." The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's eyes filled with tears, and she grabbed her purse and left the house without another word. Raymond sat alone in their living room, the weight of his words pressing down on him. When Sandra knocked on the door an hour later, claiming she had come to check on them after hearing raised voices, he was in his most vulnerable state. "She went to her mother's place," he told Sandra, accepting the bottle of beer she offered. "You know she'll forgive you," Sandra said, sitting closer to him on the sofa than friendship dictated. "Linda loves you too much to stay angry." 1 beer became 3. Sandra's hand found its way to Raymond's shoulder, then his chest. When she kissed him, he should have pulled away. He should have remembered his wedding vows, his love for Linda, the trust that had been placed in him. Instead, he surrendered to temptation. The betrayal lasted less than an hour, but its consequences would destroy everything they had built together. Linda's hands trembled as she stared at the pregnancy test. 2 pink lines. After 3 years of disappointment, heartbreak, and medical consultations, she was finally pregnant. She wanted to run to Raymond immediately, but something held her back. The memory of their recent fight, the cruel words he had spoken about accepting childlessness, made her hesitant. Instead, she called Sandra, "My sister." Sandra's voice was unusually strained when she answered. "How are you?" "Sandra, I have news," Linda whispered, unable to contain her joy. "I'm pregnant." The silence on the other end lasted too long. When Sandra finally responded, there was something odd in her tone. That's wonderful news, Linda." They agreed to meet at their usual spot, a small restaurant in Ojodu where they often shared their secrets. Linda arrived first, practically glowing with excitement. When Sandra appeared, Linda noticed she looked pale and distracted. "Are you feeling well?" Linda asked with concern. Sandra's response would haunt Linda for years to come. "Actually, Linda, I have something to tell you too." She paused, her hands fidgeting with her handbag. "I'm also pregnant." Linda's joy turned to confusion. "Pregnant? But you said you weren't seeing anyone seriously." "It's complicated," Sandra replied, unable to meet her friend's eyes. "Who is the father?" Linda pressed. Sandra's silence spoke volumes. In that moment, sitting in the crowded restaurant with the sounds of Lagos traffic outside, Linda felt the first cold finger of suspicion touch her heart. She couldn't yet name what she feared, but something deep in her spirit began to scream danger. The two women sat across from each other, both carrying children, both harboring secrets that would soon tear their friendship and Linda's marriage apart. The news of both pregnancies spread through their Ogudu neighborhood like harmattan wind carrying dust. It started innocently enough. Linda's excitement was too great to contain, and she shared her joy with Mrs. Kahind, the woman who sold provisions 3 streets away. "Ah, finally!" Mrs. Kahind had exclaimed. "After all these years, God has remembered you." But when Sandra's pregnancy became known just days later, the neighborhood women began to whisper. In Lagos suburbs, coincidences like this rarely went unnoticed. 2 best friends pregnant at the same time. Sister Taupe from their church asked her husband during dinner. "And Sandra has no husband." The whispers reached Mama Esther, the oldest woman on their street, who had seen 7 decades of neighborhood drama. She cornered Linda at the local market one Saturday morning. "My daughter," she said, her voice low and urgent, "be very careful. When 2 women are pregnant at the same time, and one has no husband, there's usually a reason." Linda tried to dismiss the older woman's concerns, but the seed of doubt had been planted. She began to notice things she had previously overlooked. How Sandra avoided direct questions about her baby's father, how she seemed uncomfortable whenever Raymond was mentioned. At church the following Sunday, Pastor Williams announced both pregnancies during testimony time. The congregation celebrated, but Linda noticed the exchange of glances between some of the older women. Sister Funmi, who ran the women's fellowship, approached Linda after service. "Sister Linda, I will be praying for you," she said with unusual intensity. "Sometimes the enemy attacks us through those closest to us." That night, Linda lay in bed next to Raymond, listening to his breathing and wondering why everyone seemed to see something she couldn't. The baby growing in her womb should have brought only joy, but instead, she felt a growing sense of unease that she couldn't shake. Linda's baby shower was planned as a joint celebration. Her idea, much to everyone's surprise. "Sandra is like my sister," she had insisted when her cousins suggested separate parties. "We should celebrate together." The small hall in Ikeja was decorated with pink and blue balloons, and women from their church, neighborhood, and extended families gathered to shower both expectant mothers with gifts and blessings. But the atmosphere grew tense as the afternoon progressed. Sandra, now 6 months pregnant, seemed to bask in the attention with an intensity that made some guests uncomfortable. She spoke about her pregnancy as if it were a miracle, often interrupting Linda's conversations to redirect focus to herself. The breaking point came during the traditional game where guests tried to guess the baby's birth weights and potential resemblances. "I think both babies will look like their fathers," declared Auntie Folake, Linda's outspoken cousin, with a mischievous grin. "Wouldn't that be something if they looked like brothers?" The room fell silent. Linda's smile froze on her face. Sandra's complexion turned ashen. "What do you mean by that?" Linda asked quietly, her voice cutting through the sudden tension. Auntie Folake, realizing she had stepped into dangerous territory, tried to backtrack. "I just meant, sometimes children of close friends." But the damage was done. Linda stood up abruptly, her hands instinctively moving to her swollen belly. "I think I need some air," she announced. Sandra followed her outside, And for the first time since childhood, the two friends faced each other with suspicion instead of love. "Linda, she didn't mean anything by it," Sandra said desperately. "Didn't she?" Linda's eyes were sharp now, seeing her friend with new clarity. "Sandra, tell me the truth. Who is your baby's father?" The question hung between them like a blade, and Sandra's inability to answer immediately told Linda everything she feared to know. Raymond couldn't sleep. For weeks, the whispers had reached his ears. Comments from co-workers, pointed questions from church members, and the growing tension in his own home. Linda had become distant since the baby shower incident, watching him with eyes that seemed to search for lies. The breaking point came when his colleague Emeka pulled him aside at the construction site. "Brother Raymond, I don't want to be the one to tell you this, but people are talking. They're saying Sandra's baby might be yours." Raymond's denial was immediate and forceful, but that night, alone with his conscience, he knew he had to face the possibility. The night of weakness 3 months ago, the night that had haunted him ever since, suddenly took on terrifying new significance. Without telling Linda, he visited a private clinic in Victoria Island that advertised discreet paternity testing. The doctor, a professional woman in her 50s, explained the process with clinical detachment. "We can test both children after birth," she said, "but given the circumstances you've described, I would recommend testing as soon as possible to avoid further complications." Meanwhile, Mama Linda had intensified her prayers and fasting. Something spiritual was happening in her family, and she could feel it in her bones. She spent hours on her knees, asking God to reveal any hidden darkness and protect her daughter from harm. Linda, now 8 months pregnant, found herself studying Raymond's face when he thought she wasn't looking. The man who had been her partner for 15 years suddenly seemed like a stranger. His guilt was written in the way he avoided her eyes, the way he jumped whenever Sandra's name was mentioned. The truth was circling them all like a vulture, and everyone could sense that the moment of revelation was approaching. In Lagos, secrets have a way of exposing themselves, and this one had grown too large to remain hidden much longer. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday morning while Linda was preparing breakfast. Raymond had been checking the mailbox obsessively for days, but today Linda reached it first. Her name was written on the envelope, but the return address was from a medical laboratory she didn't recognize. With trembling fingers, she opened it, and the world collapsed around her. DNA paternity test results. Child A, Linda Adebayo 99.9% match with Raymond Adebayo. Child B, Sandra Okafor 99.9% match with Raymond Adebayo. The paper fell from her hands as the room began to spin. 15 years of marriage, 15 years of trust, 15 years of building a life together, all destroyed by a single page of scientific truth. Raymond found her on the kitchen floor 20 minutes later, the test results scattered around her like autumn leaves. Her water had broken from the shock, and she was going into premature labor. "Linda! Linda!" he cried, dropping to his knees beside her. But when she looked at him, there was no recognition in her eyes, only the blank stare of someone whose world had just ended. The ambulance arrived within minutes, neighbors gathering in the compound as Linda was loaded onto a stretcher. Mama Linda, who had been visiting, rode with her daughter, holding her hand and praying in tongues. At the hospital, as doctors worked to stabilize Linda's condition and monitor the baby's heart rate, Raymond sat in the waiting area with the damning test results in his hands. One by one, family members arrived, their faces reflecting confusion and growing horror as the truth was whispered among them. Sandra appeared in the maternity ward that evening, her own pregnancy obvious to everyone who saw her. When Mama Linda spotted her, the older woman's voice carried through the entire hallway. "Ooh, you snake! You destroyer of homes! Get away from my daughter!" The confrontation that followed would be talked about in their neighborhood for years to come, but for Linda, lying in her hospital bed with her newborn son sleeping beside her, the noise felt distant and unreal. Her marriage was over, her best friend was revealed as her greatest enemy, and she was now a mother in a world that would never be the same. Sunday morning at Redeemed Christian Church of God, Ogudu branch, was unusually quiet. Raymond's absence from his position as an usher was noticed by everyone, but no one dared ask direct questions. Pastor Williams had called Raymond into his office 3 days after the hospital incident. The conversation was brief and decisive. "Brother Raymond, I cannot have a man who has committed adultery with his wife's best friend serving in leadership. You need to step down and seek serious counseling." The suspension from church duties was just the beginning. Raymond's supervisor at the construction company, Mr. Adebayo, ironically sharing the same surname, summoned him for a difficult conversation. "Raymond, this scandal is affecting the company's reputation. You know how these contracts work. They depend on trust and community standing. I have to transfer you to the Abuja site." The transfer meant separation from his newborn son and the possibility of rebuilding his life elsewhere, but it also meant leaving Linda to face the shame alone. Mama Linda moved into her daughter's house to help with the baby, but her presence came with daily reminders of Raymond's betrayal. Every morning brought a new wave of anger and biblical condemnation. "That man has brought generational curse upon this family," she declared while bathing her grandson. "Linda, you must take him to court. Make him pay for his sins." Linda, however, was trapped in a different kind of hell. Physically, she was recovering from childbirth. Emotionally, she felt dead inside. The baby, a beautiful boy they had planned to name Joshua, brought no joy, only a constant reminder of the deception that had surrounded his conception. Neighbors who once greeted Linda warmly now whispered when she passed. Some showed pity, others showed judgment, but all showed the curiosity that comes with witnessing a spectacular fall from grace. The shame was suffocating, and Linda began to understand why some women in similar situations chose to disappear entirely rather than face the daily humiliation of living with public betrayal. Sandra's pregnancy had become a public spectacle of shame. Unlike Linda, who had community support despite the circumstances, Sandra found herself completely alone in her disgrace. Her parents, devout Catholics from Enugu State, had disowned her the moment they learned the truth. Her father's words still echoed in her mind. "You have brought shame to our family name. Until you repent and make amends, you are no longer our daughter." The man she had been casually dating, Chinedu, a banker who had talked about marriage, disappeared from her life overnight when news of the paternity scandal reached him. He didn't even have the courtesy to break up with her directly. He simply blocked her number and avoided the places they used to meet. Living alone in her small flat in Surulere, Sandra found herself facing the consequences of a decision that had seemed so tempting just months before. The pregnancy that was supposed to give her everything Linda had instead left her with nothing. At night, when the baby kicked inside her, Sandra would remember the years of watching Linda's happiness with growing envy. In university, Linda had always been the favorite. Better grades, more friends, professors who remembered her name. After graduation, Linda had found love with Raymond while Sandra jumped from one failed relationship to another. The jealousy had grown like a cancer, feeding on every small blessing in Linda's life. When Linda struggled to conceive, Sandra had felt a twisted satisfaction. When the opportunity arose to destroy Linda's marriage, she had taken it without fully considering the consequences. Now, 7 months pregnant and completely isolated, Sandra began to understand the true cost of her betrayal. She had destroyed her best friend's life, but in doing so, she had also destroyed her own. The baby growing inside her was no longer a trophy of conquest, but a permanent reminder of the depths to which envy could drive a human soul. Sandra's son was born on a rainy Thursday morning in September. She labored alone at Lagos University Teaching Hospital, with no family or friends to support her through the process. The baby, whom she named David, appeared healthy at first, but within days, it became clear that something was wrong. He couldn't keep formula down, cried incessantly, and developed a concerning rash across his tiny body. "Mrs. Okafor," the pediatrician explained after running several tests, "your son has a severe form of gastroesophageal reflux disease combined with a milk protein allergy. He needs specialized formula and constant monitoring." The cost of the specialized care was beyond Sandra's means. Her savings had been depleted during pregnancy, and without steady employment, She faced an impossible choice: watch her child suffer or swallow her pride and ask for help. For 3 days, she sat in her small flat listening to David's cries, trying different remedies suggested by neighbors. Nothing worked. The baby was losing weight, and his skin was breaking out in painful-looking welts. Finally, desperation overcame pride. Sandra bundled David in a blanket and took a taxi to Linda's house in Ogudu. She found Linda in the backyard, hanging baby clothes on a line. Linda's son Joshua, now 2 months old, was sleeping peacefully in a basket nearby, a picture of health and contentment that contrasted sharply with the miserable child in Sandra's arms. "Linda," Sandra called softly, her voice barely audible above David's crying. Linda turned, and for a moment, the two women faced each other across a chasm of betrayal and pain. Linda's first instinct was to turn away, to refuse help to the woman who had destroyed her life. But when she saw the sick baby in Sandra's arms, her maternal instincts overrode her anger. Despite everything that had happened, she couldn't watch a child suffer. Linda's inner struggle was visible to everyone who knew her. For 3 days, she wrestled with a decision that would define her character for the rest of her life. Mama Linda was vehemently opposed to helping Sandra. "That woman destroyed your marriage and now she wants your sympathy. Let her go to the father of her child." "But Raymond is in Abuja," Linda replied quietly. "And this is about an innocent baby." The church sisters were divided. Some praised Linda's Christian charity, while others warned that helping Sandra would be seen as weakness. Sister Funmi put it most bluntly: "Linda, forgiveness doesn't mean stupidity. That woman calculated her betrayal. Let her calculate her solution." But Linda couldn't shake the image of David's tiny face, twisted in pain and hunger. She remembered her own struggles with fertility, the years of praying for a child, and how precious life seemed when it was threatened. On Sunday evening, she made her decision. She called Sandra and offered to care for David temporarily while Sandra got back on her feet financially. The arrangement was strictly businesslike. Sandra would bring David each morning and collect him each evening. Linda would provide the specialized formula and medical care the baby needed, but she made it clear that this was about the child, not about forgiveness. The first day was awkward and painful. Sandra watched Linda effortlessly soothe her son, seeing the maternal skills she herself lacked. Linda, meanwhile, found it emotionally exhausting to care for the child who represented her husband's betrayal. But gradually, something unexpected began to happen. As David's health improved under Linda's care, both women began to see past their immediate conflict to the deeper wounds that had created this situation. Linda began to realize that Sandra's betrayal, while inexcusable, had grown from years of jealousy and insecurity. Sandra, meanwhile, witnessed firsthand the grace and strength that had always made Linda special. The healing was far from complete, but in caring for David, both women began the slow process of understanding how their friendship had become so toxic and whether any part of it could ever be redeemed. The construction site in Abuja was a world away from the gentle suburbs of Lagos, and Raymond threw himself into the physical labor with desperate intensity. 12-hour days of concrete mixing and steel reinforcement left him too exhausted to think, which was exactly what he needed. But evenings were different. Alone in his small company-provided accommodation, Raymond faced the full weight of what he had done. The photos on his phone, Linda's smile, their wedding day, dreams they had shared, felt like evidence from another man's life. His attempts to call Linda were met with brief, cold conversations focused only on practical matters. She would update him on Joshua's health and development, but any attempt to discuss their relationship was shut down immediately. "Raymond, just send the money for the baby's needs," Linda would say. "We don't have anything else to discuss." The isolation in Abuja forced Raymond to confront truths about himself that he had avoided for months. He began attending a small Pentecostal church near the construction site, where the pastor, a former Lagos resident, recognized the signs of a man carrying heavy guilt. "Brother, whatever you've done, God can forgive," Pastor Adiyinka told him after a particularly emotional altar call. "But forgiveness from God is different from forgiveness from people. That one you have to earn. Raymond started sending money to Lagos, not just for Joshua's needs, but also for David's medical expenses. He wrote letters to Linda that he never sent, pouring out his regret and his desperate desire to rebuild their family. The turning point came when he received a photo from Mama Linda, a picture of Joshua taking his first steps at 4 months old, unusually early for a baby. Raymond stared at the image for hours, seeing his own features reflected in his son's face, understanding viscerally what he had lost. That night he made a decision. He would return to Lagos, not to force reconciliation, but to face the consequences of his actions and take responsibility for both of his children, regardless of how Linda responded. The daily routine of dropping David off at Linda's house and collecting him in the evening became Sandra's entire world, but it was also slowly driving her insane. Each day, she witnessed Linda's natural mothering abilities, saw how David responded to Linda's touch in ways he never responded to hers. The baby would cry when Sandra held him but settle immediately in Linda's arms. It was as if even her own child could sense her inadequacy. Sandra's mental state began to deteriorate visibly. She stopped caring for her appearance, wearing the same clothes for days and neglecting basic hygiene. Her small flat became cluttered with unwashed dishes and unpaid bills. Neighbors in her Sureleer building began to whisper about the strange woman who talked to herself while walking the corridors. Mrs. Adunny, who lived in the flat below, complained to the landlord about hearing Sandra crying and shouting at all hours of the night. The breaking point came on a Wednesday evening when Sandra arrived at Linda's house to collect David and found him laughing, truly laughing, for the first time in his short life. Linda was making funny faces at the baby while Joshua, now 6 months old, gurgled nearby. "He's never laughed like that with me," Sandra said, and the pain in her voice was unmistakable. Linda looked up, and for the first time since the betrayal, she felt a moment of genuine sympathy for her former friend. "Sandra, children can sense stress. You need to take care of yourself first." But Sandra was beyond receiving advice. "I destroyed everything," she whispered, picking up David with shaking hands. "I destroyed your life, I destroyed my own life, and now even my own child prefers you to me." That night, Sandra didn't return to her flat. She wandered the streets of Lagos with David in her arms, talking to herself about choices and consequences, forgiveness and redemption. A concerned night watchman at a petrol station called the police when he saw a woman with a baby sitting on the curb at 3 a.m., crying and speaking incoherently. The letter arrived at Linda's house on a Saturday morning, delivered by Sandra's landlord who had been cleaning out her abandoned flat. Sandra had been missing for 3 days, and David was now staying full-time with Linda while family services tried to locate his mother. "She left this address to you," the landlord explained, handing Linda a crumpled envelope, along with some other papers and photos. Linda waited until Joshua and David were both sleeping before opening the letter. What she found inside changed her understanding of everything that had happened. The letter was actually written 15 years earlier, during their university days, but never sent. In Sandra's younger handwriting, Linda read, "Dear Linda, I know you're going to marry Raymond after graduation, and I should be happy for you. But I have to tell someone that I loved him first. I loved him from the first day you introduced us, but he only had eyes for you. I've tried to be a good friend, but watching you plan your wedding is killing me inside. I know I can never tell you this, but maybe someday you'll understand why I sometimes seem distant. I pray that time will heal this feeling, but right now I feel like I'm dying inside every time I see you two together." The letter was signed but never sent, kept like a secret poison in Sandra's heart for 15 years. Mama Linda found her daughter sitting at the kitchen table, tears streaming down her face as she reread the letter. "So she's been planning this betrayal since university," Mama Linda said bitterly after reading it. But Linda saw something different. "No, Mama. She's been in pain since university. The betrayal wasn't planned. It was the result of 15 years of unhealed jealousy." The revelation didn't excuse Sandra's actions, but it provided context that Linda had never understood. Her former friend hadn't been the confident, happy woman she had appeared to be. She had been struggling with unrequited love and growing resentment for 15 years. Linda looked at the two babies sleeping peacefully in their cots, brothers who would grow up marked by their parents' failures but hopefully not defined by them. The support group met every Thursday evening in the back room of Pastor William's church. Linda had started it 6 months after Sandra's disappearance, as word spread through the community about women dealing with betrayal and abandonment. "My husband left me for my younger sister," shared Sister Kemi during one session. "I thought I would die from the shame, but being here reminds me that I'm not alone." Linda facilitated these meetings with a quiet strength that surprised everyone who knew her story. The woman who had been broken by betrayal had somehow transformed her pain into purpose. "Healing doesn't happen overnight," Linda would tell the group. "Some days I still wake up angry. Some days I still cry. But I refuse to let someone else's choices define the rest of my life." Joshua, now 8 months old, had become the unofficial mascot of the support group. The women took turns holding him during meetings, and his cheerful presence reminded them all that life could emerge from even the darkest circumstances. David remained in Linda's care while social services continued searching for Sandra. The boy was thriving under Linda's attention, and the brothers had formed a bond that transcended the circumstances of their birth. Linda had also returned to her catering business, but with a new focus. She specialized in providing meals for single mothers and struggling families, often accepting payment in the form of childcare or household help rather than cash. "God has a way of turning our greatest pain into our greatest ministry," Pastor Williams observed during one of their counseling sessions. Linda's transformation wasn't complete. She still struggled with trust issues and moments of overwhelming anger. But she had begun to build a new identity that wasn't defined by what had been done to her, but by how she had chosen to respond. The broken woman who had collapsed in her kitchen was becoming someone stronger than she had ever been before. Linda found Sandra at the Federal Neuropsychiatric Hospital in Yaba, sitting in the garden courtyard with a blank expression on her face. The woman who had once been her closest friend was barely recognizable, thin, hollow-eyed, and speaking in disconnected fragments. "She has periods of clarity," explained Dr. Ogunchues, the psychiatrist who had been treating Sandra for the past 3 months. "But the guilt and trauma have severely affected her mental state. She keeps asking about her child." Linda had debated this visit for weeks. David was now walking and calling her Mama, while Joshua had taken his first steps just days before. Both boys were healthy and happy, but David's medical records still listed Sandra as his mother. "Sandra," Linda said softly, sitting beside her former friend on the hospital bench. Sandra's eyes focused slowly, and recognition dawned. "Linda, is David? Is my baby okay?" "He's fine. He's walking now and he's very healthy." Linda's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "I dream about him every night," Sandra whispered. "I dream that I'm a good mother, that I never did what I did to you." The conversation that followed was halting and painful. Sandra's lucid moments came in waves, and during them, she expressed a remorse so deep that it seemed to have broken her mind. "I loved Raymond for 15 years, Sandra confessed during one clear moment. "But I loved hating you even more. That's what destroyed me, not loving him, but hating you for having what I wanted." Linda listened without interrupting, finally understanding the full scope of the poison that had infected their friendship. "I forgive you, Sandra," Linda said finally. The words came not from emotion but from decision, a choice she had made for her own peace rather than Sandra's comfort. "You shouldn't," Sandra replied. "I don't deserve it." "Forgiveness isn't about what you deserve," Linda explained. "It's about what I need to do to be free." When Linda left the hospital that afternoon, she knew it would be the last time she would see Sandra. The forgiveness was real, but it didn't require maintaining a relationship with someone who had caused such destruction. 2 years after the revelation that destroyed their marriage, Linda and Raymond met at a lawyer's office in Ikeja to finalize their custody arrangements. Raymond had returned from Abuja permanently, taking a job with reduced pay but closer proximity to his sons. Joshua is talking now, Linda reported, showing Raymond a video on her phone. And David calls me Mama, but I've been telling him about his real mother. Raymond watched the video of both boys playing together, and the weight of his choices pressed down on him again. Linda, I know I have no right to ask, but… No, Linda interrupted gently but firmly. We're not getting back together, Raymond. What we're doing is co-parenting these children the best way we can. The legal arrangements were straightforward. Raymond would have visitation rights with both boys, and he would continue providing financial support. Linda would retain primary custody, with Sandra's parental rights having been legally transferred to her after Sandra's mental health deterioration. After the meeting, they walked together to a nearby park where Raymond would spend the afternoon with Joshua and David. Linda watched from a distance as the boys ran to their father, and she felt a complex mixture of emotions: sadness for what they had lost, but also peace about the boundaries she had established. "Mama Joshua, you're smiling," observed Mrs. Adunny, an older woman from her support group who had become a close friend. "Am I?" Linda touched her face, surprised to realize it was true. 6 months later, Linda received a letter informing her that Sandra had passed away quietly in the psychiatric hospital. The funeral was small. Just Linda, Raymond, Sandra's parents who had flown in from Enugu, and a few former university classmates. As they lowered Sandra's casket into the ground, Linda held David's hand while Joshua played nearby. The boys didn't fully understand what was happening, but they sensed the solemnity of the moment. "Rest in peace, Sandra," Linda whispered. "I hope you found the peace in death that you couldn't find in life." Walking away from the cemetery, Linda felt truly free for the first time in years. She had her sons, her purpose, her support group, and her small but growing catering business. She had learned to be happy alone, to find strength in herself rather than in others' approval. Raymond remained part of their lives but at a careful distance, a father to his children but no longer a husband to her. The restoration was real, but it looked nothing like what any of them had originally imagined. That evening, as Linda tucked Joshua and David into their beds, she realized that her story had become something she never expected. Not a tragedy about betrayal, but a testimony about the strength that can emerge from the deepest pain. The woman who had once defined herself as Raymond's wife and Sandra's best friend had become something more powerful. Linda, a mother, a leader, a survivor who had chosen healing over hatred and purpose over pity. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all.